Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Campus Consortium's EdTalks, featuring University of South Florida. Today's topic for EdTalks is Predictive Analytics in Higher Education. Before we begin, we would like to thank our dear sponsors for all their support. Without them, we would not be able to bring these EdTalks to you. As you can see, some of our sponsors are HDI, Cisco, Salesforce. And if you'd like to become one of our sponsors, you can send an email to sharon.das@campusconsortium.org. Our presenters for today include Dr. Paul Dosal, who is the Vice President, Student Affairs at Student Success at the University of South Florida, and Ms. Annie Hugh, Vice President, Community Engagement at Campus Consortium. We will take questions at the end of today's presentation that have been typed into the chat box or questions pane in your GoToWebinar control panel. Without further ado, please allow me to present Ms. Hugh and Dr. Paul Dosal. Over to you, Annie.
Thank you, Roger. For folks who have joined us today, I'd like to give you a warm welcome, and I'm glad that you've joined us today for today's webinar and the Ed Talk. I'd like to talk a little bit about Paul. Paul has been gracious enough to join us for this webinar. For folks who have joined us today, Paul is the Vice President for Student Affairs and Student Success at the University of South Florida. He is responsible for coordinating university-wide student success initiatives, strategic campaigns to raise retention and graduation rates, boost student satisfaction, minimize financial indebtedness, and prepare students for success in their careers or graduate in professional schools. Paul is also the professor of Latin American history at the university, specializing in modern history of Cuba and the Caribbean region. He's quite a multi-talented individual. He's also authored quite a number of books, including Comandante Che, a study of the military career of the legendary Latin American revolutionary Ernesto Che Guevara, and doing business with the dictators. A history of the infamous United Fruit Company in Guatemala in the early 20th century. So we'd like to welcome Paul. Paul, welcome to the consortium and to EdTalks. We wanted to give this platform to you to share your views and also help keep our higher ed institutions abreast. I just want to take a quick check if you could hear audio and if you could confirm the logistics with you. Can you hear me, Paul?
Yes, I can, Annie. Thank you so much. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, Paul, I certainly can. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'd like to begin the session without any further delay. So over to you, Paul.
Thank you very much, and I'm honored by the opportunity to join Campus Consortium and share our experiences using predictive analytics. And I'm eager to share what we've learned with all the participants today. We all face certain challenges in higher education, and predictive analytics offers one possible solution to help out as we try to find ways to raise completion rates and help our students earn the degree of their choice in a timely manner. But at the outset, I want to emphasize, though, that predictive analytics offers a means of serving our students better. It's not a panacea for everything, and I want to be careful not to overstate the case. We have used big data here at USF since 2014, and in another fashion even earlier than that. But in many ways, we're still trying to figure out how to use predictive analytics more effectively. We still have many questions and concerns, and so that's one of the reasons why I enjoy sharing our experiences with others, because I think we learn in the process. But let me begin first by sharing you some basic data points about the University of South Florida. As you'll see in the next slide, we are a high-impact global research university dedicated to student success. If you would, please move on to the next slide. But we're divided into 3 different campuses. I'm at the main one in Tampa, but we also have institutions at St. Petersburg, as well as Sarasota and Manatee. and a major research university located in a huge metropolitan region. But our dedication to student success is firm. It starts at the top. This is an institution that has made a commitment to student success under the leadership of President Judy Genshaft. And in my position, I'm held accountable for our persistence in graduation rates. And that's one of the keys to the success that we've had. That is, it's an institutional commitment. We plan performance and we're held accountable. And that's part of the institutional culture that I'll be speaking with you about it. But I also want to share, though, that the experiences at USF are not necessarily applicable to other universities, that each institution probably has to find its own way as it tries to figure out how best to use big data to serve its students. So in the next slide, you'll see our retention rate. Our first-year retention rate is, of course, one of the main metrics we use here and is common around the country. And we were happy to see our retention rate climb up to a high of 89% with the 2013 cohort. But as you'll notice there, what I want to point out, on our path toward 90, which was our target, we hit what we called a performance plateau. And we were sort of stuck, unable to get beyond 89, but the state of Florida uses 90% as the benchmark for excellence on this particular metric. So we were determined a few years ago, back in 2015, as we saw this plateau, to figure out a way to move off that plateau and improve our performance. The same is true in our 6-year graduation rate, which you'll see in the next slide, that we had enjoyed remarkable growth. I'm pleased to say, you know, when I came on board and took over the role of vice provost in 2010, our graduation rates were about at the national average, but our president and provost both made it clear that that was not acceptable and that we had to elevate our performance. So we realized some quick gains, but we also hit a plateau of sorts. That is, we hit a high of 68% graduation rate with the 2009 cohort and fell back the subsequent year to 67.5. But again, the state of Florida uses performance benchmark of 70% to evaluate and rate excellence on this particular metric. So we were, again, trying to figure out ways to move off that plateau and hit the standard of excellence and move over 70%. Even more significantly along the way, many institutions across the country, of course, are struggling with achievement gaps by race, ethnicity, and income. And so we provide you a slide that shows the 6-year graduation rate by race and ethnicity, showing in the next slide that at the same time we increased our graduation rates from 51 to 71%, we also eliminated the achievement gap by race and ethnicity. And so you'll see, for example, in the right column of this bar graph, in the 2011 cohort, Black students recorded a 6-year graduation rate of 73.9%, which was higher than the white student rate of 67.7. Hispanics were also above the white student graduation rate, with Hispanics recording a 71.3. We, like many other institutions, monitored this particular rate and are looking for equity in outcomes. And so we were pleased to see that along the way, Hispanic and Black students were able to elevate their performance and the gap no longer exists on this particular metric. Again, though, we're looking for parity in outcomes in many different ways. So we also monitor the 6-year graduation rate by Pell versus non-Pell students, which is the next slide. And there you see with the 2011 cohort, Pell students, the next slide, please.
Hello,
Pell
Pat.
grant.
We have a couple of questions coming in from the audience on your slide. Would you want to address that right now or towards the end of the session?
I could if you'd like me to. I'm sorry I don't see them, but okay. Is there one in particular you wanted me to address?
There are two, in fact. I think our audience is quite interactive.
Okay,
So
sure.
the first question is from Pat Mizak. His question is, isn't there still an achievement gap here?
Yes. Yes, are we looking at the PEL versus non-PEL or the other one by race and ethnicity?
I think it's for the current slide you're on.
The current slide on PEL versus non-PEL? Well, in any case, in both, there are gaps. And so in the one on race and ethnicity back on the screen, I am concerned now that the gap has widened too much. I'm looking for parity in outcomes. So with white students now almost 7 points behind black students and lagging further behind Asian students who recorded a remarkable 87%, I'm wondering what is wrong. If it were reversed, I'm sure many of us would be concerned, and so I am concerned about that gap, and I want to elevate performance of all students, and so yes, indeed, there are reasons to be concerned about the gap.
Thank you so much, Paul, for answering that question. There's one other, I think, on this slide before we move ahead.
Okay.
That would be, will you be discussing academic profile of the students as well? Did your academic profile increase, which may be the factor in your increased results of retention and graduation?
Yes, and I don't have a slide showing that, but it's a good question, an issue to address right now, because yes, in the cohorts that are on screen now between 2004 and 2011, we did raise admission standards, and the entering academic profile of the students increased in terms of SAT scores, ACT, as well as high school GPA. I think it's roughly, the SAT score, for example, reached a high of 1203 around with the 2011 cohort, and that was up from about 1170 just 2 or 3 years before that. However, I also want to mention at the same time we were raising our admission standards, the diversity profile of our students also increased. That is, we increased the percentage of minority students enrolled at USF at the same time we elevated the admissions standards. And so we're more diverse now than we were when we started that process. So right now, about 42% of our undergraduate students identify as an underrepresented minority. About 10 years ago when we started this process, maybe 25% of our students identified as an underrepresented minority. And the same is true of PEL. We had about 25% PEL in the 2004 cohort, in the 2011 cohort, and even today it's about 40% PEL students. So, and thank you for the questions. I can continue to answer them as we move forward. And I wanted to show the next slide because, again, given our interest in parity and equity and outcomes, in the next slide it shows a 6-year graduation rate by gender. And so we are currently monitoring this metric carefully because the biggest gap we have is between males and females, with females outperforming undergraduate males occasionally by 11 or 12 points on this metric. We've narrowed it slightly with the 2011 cohort, but we want to continue to see that gap narrow as well. Again, looking for equity and outcomes, and I think as we get more into the talk about predictive analytics, I see that tool as giving us the power to help us identify students and intervene early in ways that might help us close these gaps. So
Thank you, Paul, for answering the question. Go ahead.
Okay. Was there another one?
There's one more that has just come in, and the question was, I think, on general analytics. So was USF proactive early on with big data or merely responsible to the state of Florida performance-based funding model in regards to the student retention public institutions?
Well, if I understand the question correctly, we had initiated our student success movement and were focused on metrics several years before the state of Florida implemented its performance-based funding model, which meant that we were in a good position to respond quickly and effectively to the performance funding model. We still have to adapt every year because those metrics are often changed.
Thank you, Paul, and thank you, Robert and Terrell, for your questions. We may move on.
Thank you. So, moving on to the student success movement at USF slide, I wanted to give some background, some context. In fact, you can go on to the next one. Set up the context for the adoption of predictive analytics in 2014. We had launched a campus-wide movement back in 2009, produced a 150-page report in April 2010 that still serves as our blueprint for student success. And even back then, we recognized that we had to build our institutional research capacity to promote student success. But at the time, I had no idea what predictive analytics referred to. I didn't know what that meant. But we understood that we had to build our research capacity. I would also emphasize too, that at the time, we also recognized the importance of bringing everybody on campus into the student success movement. And so one of our key communication campaigns was promoting the idea that student success was everybody's responsibility. And as part of the effort, the initiative included, on the next slide, you'll see a list of some of the policies, programs, practices that we initiated as part of our student success movement. This slide shows a picture of our Smart Lab, where we teach redesigned college algebra courses and others. But we've also implemented many of the standard programs and practices that institutions across the country have used to promote student success, professionalization of academic advising, career services, living learning communities, the whole thing. We've done so much, and those initiatives combined help to raise the performance of our students in terms of the retention and graduation rates. But another part of the campaign you'll see illustrated on the next slide was really a communications campaign focused on changing the institutional culture, our mindset, and behavior. And so we promoted the idea that all of our students would succeed when given the opportunity to do so. When we launched the Student Success Initiative, too many people, faculty, staff, and students were saying we couldn't do that. We couldn't raise our admission standards, for example, without sacrificing diversity, or that we couldn't raise our graduation rates because our students were first-gen or part-time or low income, so that we couldn't do that. And yet we promoted the idea that we could do that, we should do that, and the case is that we have succeeded in all these areas, and our students are proving us right all along. They are succeeding at rates that we dreamed of back then, and it's confirming the approach that we've taken. And yet, we felt the need to turn to data for a kickstart, which was in 2014, 2015, in the next slide. We had been using an in-house predictive model developed in-house by Dr. Tom Miller, who was then serving as the Vice President for Student Affairs. And Tom developed a model using pre-enrollment data, mostly coming out of the BESI survey that students take at orientation, for example. And he built a model that helped us identify at-risk students entering their first year at USF. And we began to use that in 2012 and applied it to our first-year courses, but also brought in academic advisors and resident assistants to help out in the effort to improve student performance. But to move us off that plateau in retention and graduation rates, we turned to big data in 2014 when we engaged with the Civitas learning community, an Austin, Texas-based company, one of many out in the field promoting predictive analytics. We contracted with them in 2014, impressed by their integration of data coming out of the SIS, as well as the learning management system. and incorporated the data and developed the model and began to apply it in 2015 and into 2016. And on the next screen, you'll see a screenshot of the Illume program. That is the basic, the foundation of the Civitas Predictive Analytics model, which uses over 300 variables and 10 years of data from our SIS and LMS systems. It gives us the power to identify all students or selected subgroups of students and see the likelihood of their persistence into the next semester. So in this screenshot, I filtered out summer and fall 2016 FTIC students to get a snapshot of how they were doing. This platform sorts students into buckets based on their persistence likelihood. They use 5 different categories ranging from very low to very high. And so once this was online and we began to think about how we could use it to move ourselves off that plateau, we realized that we had the capability to identify students in those very low, and moderate categories who would be likely to benefit from some kind of assistance and intervention if it were offered in a timely way. And so that changed the way we were thinking about how we used the predictive analytics platform. However, it took us a while to get there. In the next slide, you'll see the A-team approach. So we had one false start as we were trying to figure out how to use the power of predictive analytics. We formed what was called an A-team. And we thought this was the way to use the insights from the platform. So we pulled together a high-level group, vice presidents, associate provosts, deans, and so forth. And we began to look at the insights coming out of Illume. But we didn't do much because this wasn't a group of people focused on action, taking action to support students. So instead, we spent our time in several meetings just talking about the insights and wondering about how we might use them, but we didn't change anything. So what we ended up learning is that this wasn't an action team, despite the name. We were too high level, and this wasn't the right group of people to pull together if it was about taking appropriate actions to serve our students. And so that was one of the lessons learned, highlighted on the next slide, please. That, it took us a while. Yes.
There's another question on your slide. Would you mind us to intervene?
Okay, sure.
The question is from Lamar University, Brian Shook. He would like to know, how did you balance the loss of enrollment when you raised admission standards? That is, balancing enrollment-based funding versus student-based funding.
So we didn't lose enrollment as we raised admission standards. Quite reverse. Our enrollments have increased. From the time we started this initiative, maybe in like around 2005, our enrollment probably jumped from about 25,000 to 40,000. Although now we've been trying to hold our admissions or enrollment at about 40,000, but we keep creeping up. So in Tampa, we enroll now about 43,000.
Thank you, Dr. Dosal. You may proceed. No more questions.
Thank you. Okay. So I was on the lessons learned. It was a powerful lesson for me because I can recall distinctly when the Civitas platform went live and I finally had access to it. I really turned it on and sat down one Sunday afternoon thinking that the Illume platform would tell me what I needed to do, that it would show me where the problems were, and tell me how I could and should correct them. But instead, what we've learned over time is that the predictive analytics tools that we're developing paint a picture of a possible future, or they shine a light on certain problems or help us identify struggling students. And because it identifies struggling students, we needed to focus more on action rather than research. So that led us to shift our approach. After the fall start then, we formed in early 2016, next slide please, a persistence committee. I got together with my colleagues, the then Vice President for Student Affairs and the Dean of Undergraduate Studies, and the three of us formed this cross-functional team with staff from a number of different offices, and charged this team to use the list of at-risk students that we could pull from the Civitas platform, as well as the in-house model that we had been using, identify the struggling students, and then take appropriate action to help out those students. We also made it clear that it was the highest priority of the university to do this. We were determined to move our retention rate to 90%. And we all made it clear that if there were resources they needed, please tell us, and that we could and should go and get them the resources they needed to carry out this mission, which was, again, a highest priority for the university. And it is responsible for, or let me say it this way, the use of predictive analytics by this group of people helped to move us off that performance plateau on both retention rates and graduation rates. So it was transformative in many ways. In the next slide, you'll see how we've been changing our approach to promoting student success. And so the work of this persistence committee has led us to this slogan, which is that what we're trying to do now is provide the student with the right support at the right time. That is, we want to intervene with struggling students before problems occur, before it gets so bad that we've lost them and that they've decided to drop out or transfer. Moreover, we're also trying to refer students to the appropriate office. It's not just academic advisors doing this work. We have an entire network of support personnel ranging from financial aid offices and career counseling to resident assistants, and we want to engage all of them in a dynamic network of service providers using the insights that we're getting out of the Civitas platform as well as the first-year retention model that we're using. And so this approach then we took with the persistence committee has been leading us into a case management approach to student success, which you see outlined in the next slide. And here we learn from experiences of other universities and even our own team. We had a team dedicated to case management of students with behavioral issues, as many universities have. And the case management approach had been in use for that team. But we realized we were now trying to apply it across the university in ways that we had not done before. Trying to provide the student with the right support might mean that the students in the very low, and moderate risk categories, those students probably needed more high-touch care, and that we needed to coordinate that care across the different offices. Many of our students, of course, would be seeing a financial aid advisor, an academic advisor. A resident assistant might be touching that student as well. Instructors, too, should be brought into this. And so we're developing a case management approach, trying to triage the student's needs and deliver the appropriate and timely support. Students in the high and very high categories who are doing just fine may not need that kind of assistance, but they might need and benefit from other kinds of support, like encouraging them to take advantage of high-impact practices like study abroad and internships. And we're trying to bring them in as well and make sure that they're getting that kind of assistance at the right time. The case management approach, like predictive analytics, and they're both very much linked together, these are both works in progress. We're still learning from and trying to adapt and enhance our approach. But along the way, we have learned some things, and there are some recommendations and even some do-overs that we would like to share with you in the next slide. We certainly learned that predictive analytics gives us insight only. It's the beginning of a conversation. It doesn't tell us everything about the student. It gives us many insights about the student, but it doesn't tell us everything. And that we ought to be thinking about the predictive analytics platform as a means by which we can promote appropriate action. There's a whole lot of research that can come out of this, I'm sure, but I think we have the opportunity, we even have the duty, I would say, to do something now to help our students. And it requires us, though, to change our approach in so many ways. We have offices on our campus, and I'm sure the same is true of other campuses, where tutoring, for example, tutors might wait in their office for students to come to them. I'm trying to transform the approach and say, no, I want our tutors to go out and reach out to students who might benefit from their assistance even before they know it. I think if we wait for students to come to us, many students don't come. It's particularly true, we've learned through our research on male student success, for example, that they're not power users of our offices like the tutoring center. And so we need to think about outreach in different ways and getting to students who would not ordinarily seek out the kind of services and assistance that is already available to them. On the next slide, I have another set of recommendations and do-overs. And one is really for all of us to be careful about how we intervene, who does the intervening, making sure that the people doing the interventions are trained properly. I certainly do not want to get out there to tell us and start a conversation by telling a student that I believe he or she is at risk and is likely to fail. Instead, oftentimes I just want somebody to reach out and start a conversation with a student. We can benefit from the insights we gain from our predictive analytics platform, but we shouldn't be restricted by what we see, and we shouldn't allow that predictive capability then to convince us that a student is destined to a certain fate. Instead, it should help us understand the kind of resources we can provide to the students at a moment in time and do our best to help the student toward the end we all seek, which is on-time graduation with the degree of their choice. For that very reason, I think it's very important to point out that live data is much more powerful than the dead data. And by this, I mean only that while pre-enrollment data is very helpful, and again, we continue to use that pre-enrollment data in our first-year retention model, but the data we're pulling out of our LMS is very powerful. It's showing us in real time, for example, students who are not participating in classes, they're not logging on to the LMS or participating in online discussions, their grades are less than their peers, something is going on, and we can pull a lot of insights out of the LMS data, and that's one of the advantages we have, and we're still trying to figure out how to use it, of course, but that's powerful data which we're using to identify students in real time. It's related to a term that often gets me into trouble when I say I'm willing to use dirty data, which means basically I don't need 100% precision. I'm only trying to identify students who are struggling and would benefit from assistance. It doesn't have to be 100% accurate. If I reach out to students who are just doing fine and don't need my help, that's fine too. But if it helps me identify students in real time, I think that's plus, and I'm willing to take it. It's related then to another issue that we're encountering here and around the country, I think. There's a big difference between the data that we report out to our IR offices and the operational data we're using now to identify students who are struggling and getting our persistence committee to intervene with them. They're using operational data. It doesn't have to be 100% accurate, but it gives us insights and allows us to intervene now in meaningful ways and help our students out on their path to timely graduation. And so all of this is producing a change in culture, changing the way we think about IR data, think about operational data. IR offices around the country are changing their approach. Some of the IR offices are incorporating the analytics into their offices, and right now at our institution, IR is managing our analytics platform. But the operational data that they're providing is very different from the kind of data they use to report out to the state and other organizations. So if I could move on then, we are implementing predictive analytics, using predictive analytics, and we've achieved some noticeable results. We've moved off the plateau. Our retention rate is over 90% now, and our 6-year graduation rate is at 71 and climbing. And those successes moving off the needle, off the plateau, I think are attributable to the way we've been using predictive analytics by our persistence committee. And I wanted to refer you here to an article that just came out this week by Kevin Carey of the New American Foundation, published in Washington Monthly. He took a good look at how we're using predictive analytics. And despite the title, in which he says more colleges should treat students like numbers, I think he does a great job of explaining how we're using it to make our campus much smaller. That is to think, we have 43,000 students on the USF Tampa campus, and we're identifying students in real time who can benefit from our assistance and intervening in ways that make a difference. And it's boosting our graduation rate. And I think we all have the opportunity to use predictive analytics in ways that can promote student success around the country. And so I applaud Kevin for suggesting that, if we all come together and use predictive analytics and other means, just a 5% national increase would make a huge difference in the lives of our students and in the country. And finally, in the next slide, because this is an ongoing conversation, I wanted to mention some of my colleagues are coming together in Tampa next February 27 to March 1. We're having a panel discussion at our Student Success Conference on this very topic of predictive analytics in higher education. My colleagues at Wayne State, Morgan State, Middle Tennessee, and UNC Charlotte are using predictive analytics, and we've been engaged in conversations and trying to learn from each other about what's working, what's not working so well. And I think it's a really healthy conversation to have. We're all using different platforms. And so I think this kind of conversation benefits our students, it benefits us. And I would encourage all of you to look at the article by Kevin Carey or take a look at the upcoming Student Success Conference that we're having. But many institutions, many conferences around the country are focused on this topic. And the discussion is leading us, I think, into using predictive analytics fully. One of my concerns and one reason I wanted to put a panel like this together at our conference is that while we've made gains, I want to leave you with this idea that we've made a whole lot of gains here recently, but I also sense that we are only beginning to use predictive analytics. I don't sense that we're using the capabilities fully. I think there's a whole lot more to learn. We're just skimming the surface, and that gives me great confidence and optimism that we can serve our students even better and achieve even greater results. So with that, I'm certainly open, Annie, to taking any additional questions and having a discussion.
Hello, Dr. Dosal. Just give me a minute here. I'm just picking up the questions. one of the questions from the audience that I have today is what do you see as the next big areas for the use of predictive analytics on college campus in the next few years?
Okay, great question. One topic we're focused on now is helping instructors, faculty members, figure out how to use predictive analytics in their classrooms. We haven't done much of that here at USF, but the Civitas platform has a powerful tool called Courses, helping us understand how a student's performance in a particular class and how a particular grade might reflect the likelihood of them graduating with a degree based on that performance. It's giving us insights that we haven't had before. It's taking, for example, our old analyses of passing rates. You know, many of us have used DFW rates as an indicator of student performance, and using that as an evaluation of teaching effectiveness, at least one means. But getting faculty to understand the insights and then developing best practices, redesigning their courses, or referring the students to advisors or support personnel. There's so much more we could do. Other universities are engaging faculty in this effort, but at USF we've not done that yet. We've been trying to proceed cautiously and deliberately. So for us, that's the next big area.
Thank you, Dr. Dosal. I believe we have a very, very interactive audience. We've got another question from Stephen Strom, and his question to you is, what have you done to address students with financial risk?
Okay. Our persistence committee has a couple of funds that they can draw on to help out students. We found students in a couple of different categories. Many students actually will encounter some short-term financial obstacles. They have trouble paying a bill or something, and we have a fund set up for emergency grant assistance to those students. And the persistence committee is set up in such a way that they can vet those students for me and bring students to my attention, and we can provide them with grant assistance to meet those short-term needs. We've also found out that there are students with larger financial issues. We've had a couple of cases that have come through the persistence committee of international students, for example, whose economies back home tanked and meant that they were unable to pay their bills. That requires a larger amount of aid, but we've set up a process by which I can bring those cases to the attention of the appropriate people here and resolve some of those bigger ticket items as well.
Thank you, Dr. Dosal. I think there's another question coming in from him that says, one factor mentioned for real-time data was students logging in. What other factors are used? On the LMS data, it would include things like their participation in discussions online, their quizzes, their grades are in there, assuming the faculty member uses that tool and puts the grades in there. That's great. Attendance is also in there, and there are many others, but I should point out that one reason that activity in the LMS is so important is that the way it's set up, a student is measured against the activity of other students in the same class, and so it's measured relative to how other students are logging on and attending and performing in class. Thank you, Dr. Dosal. I believe Robert Hill has been looking forward to ask a really, really long question, but I think he's made a comment and a question together. So his comment is, certainly, I'd like to hear more about data-driven decisions making regarding student success initiatives. However, institutions that are highly selective in their admissions naturally have better retention and higher graduation rates. So since you get transfer students from the Hillsborough, St. Pete's, Manatee State Colleges. My question is, what do you think of Florida's performance-based funding models now also applying to the 28 state community colleges, which have an open admission policy and access and equity philosophy model, and which no longer require remedial development classes after 2013's SB 1720 law?
Yes. A couple of things. One, first, on the issue of highly selective institutions, while there is a correlation, and of course, highly selective institutions certainly will have higher retention and graduation rates. But I also want to point out that we shouldn't assume that similar institutions will have similar rates. So, for example, the Education Trust does a good job of comparing like institutions, you know, with similar academic profiles of entering students, and they still see significant differences in graduation and retention rates. So institutional behavior, programs, and practices matter a whole lot. It's not just about admitting students with a better or stronger academic profile. We still have to do much more to promote student success. On the other question, I think regarding the state of Florida's performance metrics, of course, I would say if I had the opportunity to develop my own metrics, they might look very different, but I have to deal with the metrics as they are. And so we try our best to meet those performance standards, but at the same time, we'll also point out that because in the state of Florida, for example, and even at the University of South Florida, half of our students come into the university as transfer students. And so we've developed stronger articulation agreements with the partners in our Tampa Bay area to promote transfer student success. And I would even go so far to say, you know what, it would make a whole lot of sense for the state of Florida to develop a metric focused on transfer student success, since so many of our students come in as transfers. That matters a whole lot, and we focus on transfer student success even though it's not currently a metric. We care about all of our students, not just FTICs. We care about transfer students, graduate students as well. We even have a graduate student success initiative going on, and I think all of us should be aware of that and promote the success of all of our students.
Thank you, Dr. Dosal. I think a very inquisitive audience member would like to know what LMS you're using.
Oh, Canvas.
Canvas. Great.
Yes.
So I think I'd like to just leave you with one last question for the day before we wrap up the session, right? And the last question that we have from our audience is, do you think people have gotten more used to the concept of data being a key part of decision making? Is the answer different depending on someone's role or department in an institution?
Great questions. I'm not sure that we are where we need to be yet. And as even at USF, we are driven by performance metrics. We measure, we plan performance all the time. But I don't think we're there yet. That is, we are data informed, but we still haven't tapped into the full power of all the data that's available to us. There's much more. Universities like this one, we collect a whole bunch of data, but we're often paralyzed by it. So right now, for example, I am interested in developing data dashboards for all of my units, providing them with live, actionable data that can inform their work right now. I think we're often a little too slow to get the kind of data we need to impact student performance right now. The time has come for us to say, look, I'm going to take action based on the kind of data I have right now. I can't wait 6 months for a report to come out telling me what happened in the past. Instead, we need to be taking action right now, serving the students who are in our classes, in our offices right now as well.
Thank you, Dr. Dosal. That brings us to the end of our question session. However, we've got a lot of thank you notes coming in from all those folks who asked you questions today. That's from Robert, Stephen, and from Anne Beret at EDUCAUSE. She left a message for you, which I'll shortly communicate after the session. But your session was extremely informative and insightful. Thank you once again. Before we move ahead for the audience who've joined us today, I hope Campus Consortium has brought another session to you, which is, again, we saw a lot of intriguing, inspiring talk from Dr. Dosal, and I hope that it was really, really informative. So before I let you go, I just want to talk a little bit about Consortium and what we're trying to do. We've been trying to bond with higher ed for the last 15 years. We started as a consortium that was started by 14 universities, including University of Montana and Case Western Reserve University. And our mission has been to reduce the cost of education throughout the world. With such a bold mission, we open up a lot of grant programs to help institutions to leverage some kind of IT product or service that they want to implement on campus but need not necessarily have the budget. So if you're looking to apply for one of these grant programs that you see on the screen, please feel free to. You could opt in for a mobile campus grant or a student engagement app, right? You could also look in for things like self-service password reset. It's very high on analytics or capturing analytics if you need to capture that. You have the single sign-on identity grant, which again helps you reduce the effort of remembering multiple usernames and passwords, and also recognizing multiple identities across applications. And last but not the least, the Office 365 migration grant, just in case you need that extra help to get you over on the mailbox migration and support. So that's typically what we have. We've come to the close of the session today. It's roughly about 1:53 p.m. Chicago time. For those who are interested in the grant application, please write to us. We're at grantapplication@campusconsortium.org, or simply visit our website for more EdTalks and other grant-related questions. Once again, Dr. Dosal, thank you so much for joining us today. Once again, this is really intriguing, inspiring for all of us. It's great how you shared your journey and how important it is for all of us to know about your journey. And as we learn along the way, and you refine as you go. So once again, it's a great thank you from all of us, and you guys have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.